Hello and welcome to Gathering Folds. Today we're talking about resources for people just getting into folding origami tessellations. Resources for beginners. And first on that list is Tessellation Foundations. These are a series of tutorials that I filmed, and they cover all of the techniques for gridding and for getting into origami tessellations. So things like reordering pleat overlaps, things like setting up pleats and having them cross each other and it makes this cool wave shape. These are very achievable patterns, especially this one, for new origami tessellation folders. And we get into triangle grids as well, with intersections of 3 pleats that are laid down flat. More with the square grids. And I'll do this order. There is a particular order in the series, but of course they don't stack well in that order on my shelf. This is a pattern called Clover with a modified border. The original design was made back in the 70s, I want to say 60s or 70s, by Shuzo Fujimoto, and it's a great way to practice using intersections of 4 pleats on a square grid with diagonals without actually adding any new folds other than the grid as you're folding. So that's the emphasis in Tessellation Foundations, adding and making patterns without adding any new creases. Just using the background grid and learning to manipulate the paper in a way that creates these patterns, and you start to get familiar with ideas like triangle wraps, like 3-way intersections, which are the same thing on opposite sides of the paper, that are going to be very helpful for future folding. Welcome, Spot. I'm glad you could make it. And then there's 2 lessons in Tessellation Foundations where you do add new creases on top of the background grid. This one on square intersections. So you can have your pleats of a square intersection going any way you like, and one of those gives you a twist, and then the triangle twist. These are closed triangle twists, all folded from one hexagon of paper. So most of these patterns use squares. There's 2 that use hexagons, and yeah, there's all kinds of good stuff. All of the grids for these patterns are also taught in videos inside of Tessellation Foundations, and you can find the link to that in the description below. This grid is a relatively advanced technique, at least if you're talking to beginners, where you rotate the grid relative to the underlying hexagon so that the grid lines are now perpendicular to the edge instead of parallel. And that makes a real difference for a lot of patterns. So these are all the grid types that you'll usually see me ask for in tutorials on YouTube. One thing I didn't mention yet is this includes divisions of 3. It includes divisions of 5. So this pattern is actually folded on 40 grid divisions on a triangle grid on a hexagon. And having those resources at your fingertips of, oh, I can go to this video and see how to divide in thirds on a hexagon. I can go to that video and see how to divide in fifths on a square for a grid. That is very helpful. And so you'll see all the grid types: square grids with diagonals, triangle grids on hexagons, triangle grids on squares, diagonal triangle grids. You'll see all of these types of grids inside of Tessellation Foundations. The next resource that I want to highlight is Advent of Tess. Advent of Tess is a series of free tutorials that and I don't think I mentioned Tessellation Foundations is completely free. I just ask for your email. That is all. So for Advent of Tess, this is a series of patterns that I release tutorials for daily from December 1st through 25th. I've been doing this since 2022. So I've released 4 series so far. I'm working on my 5th one now. And these patterns get harder as you go. So this is kind of a variation on the closed triangles pattern in Tessellation Foundations. And then the next day includes open triangle twist, this bigger size as well. And the next day includes double open triangle twists. And then the next day you use triangle twists on both sides of the paper. And you start building up. You get the closed hexagon, open hexagon, closed rhombus twist. And as you go, you're getting more and more complex to the point where the first 5 to 10 days are very accessible for beginners. And then after that, it's really pushing, okay, the intermediate level folders, days 10 to 20, really, the intermediate folders are really pushing their skills. And then the last several days, like 15 to 25, 20 to 25, somewhere in that zone, the advanced folders are really pushing their skills. But since there's so many different years that I've been running Advent of Tess, and it's completely different patterns every time, if you go to training.gatheringfolds.com/advent, that link is also in the description, and you sign up and you check the box to get the course version, you can see all 100 tutorials that have already been released in one place where you can mark them completed as you go, and you can go through and do day 1 of each series, and then day 2 of each series, and build up gradually like that. And all of a sudden you have 40 patterns that are in days 1 through 10. And by the time you work through those, well, maybe there will be a 5th series out. And so you can really build up a lot of knowledge by working through these video tutorials. The next thing that I want to bring up is Basic Twist Bootcamp. This is a paid course that I also put together. And the idea with Basic Twist Bootcamp is that you will learn all of the 8 basic twists that are used in Origami Tessellations. And you'll be able to use them in patterns that repeat. So we've got the closed and open forms of the square twists, the triangle twists, equilateral triangle, and the hexagon twists, and then the closed right triangle and closed rhombus. These are what I consider the 8 basic twists. And then the 10 lessons in Basic Twist Bootcamp go through and they teach you, okay, if you have a pattern with only closed square twists, we're going to see the right-handed form and the left-handed form. What sequence would you work through this pattern? How would you continue adding more and more to this pattern? And then we move on to the next pattern. Okay, with the open square, what sequence are we working around? And building up these ideas. Likewise with the closed triangle, you just get a lot more practice with these Basic Twist Bootcamp pieces because they're so focused on learning each individual twist. And then the secret thing that people might not notice, it's the 10 core lessons, but I've been having an office hour every month for the last 3 years for this course. So there are many more patterns, including most of the combinations of these basic sizes in simple patterns, these basic twists, that you can find recordings of in those office hour recordings as well. Likewise, we've got the open triangle twist lesson. You'll notice that all of these pieces so far have been folded on square sheets of paper. And then there's the closed hexagons. And here we see the easiest way to fold hexagons is with triangles, and the open hexagons. And I chose to do closed hexagon with closed triangle, open hexagon with open triangle. And then there's actually 2 lessons on the right triangles, one with these right triangles in stripes, and another with the right triangles in loops. And technically you can find loops over here as well, but it's the same exact loop everywhere. Here we have this loop of 8, that loop of 8, and this loop of 4, as opposed to loops of 6 everywhere over here. And actually, you can see the loops more clearly on the back. So these shapes have 6 corners. Here we have octagons and squares. So this is a different structure that uses only right triangle twists. And then the rhombus twists, also on a square sheet of paper. Everything's been squares so far. And then for the capstone, putting the hexagon, the triangle, and the rhombus together, we use a hexagon. So that is what is inside of Basic Twist Bootcamp. And like I said, one of the benefits that comes with Basic Twist Bootcamp, besides the lessons, so Tessellation Foundations and Advent of Tess, those are purely recordings. With Basic Twist Bootcamp, you also get 1 hour a month to chat with me on a Zoom call and ask whatever questions you want. You can ask about more advanced patterns. You can ask about somewhere that you're stuck and get pointers on how to move forward. So these are the 3 core resources for beginners if you're just testing the waters. If you want to try it, see how it goes, see how well you can learn it, these are the resources for you. I do have a more involved beginner level resource that is Tessellation Starter Sequence, but I'll talk about that a bit more in another video because it does feed more into those intermediate level skills. So these are the resources I'd recommend, and then the paper that I'd recommend. You've seen 2 different kinds of paper that I've been using for these. These brightly colored papers are taunt, and the pale colors, the pastel colors, are skytone. You can find squares, hexagons, and rectangles of skytone at gatheringfolds.com. There are 2 different sizes of hexagons. One size is 5 inches per side, which is absolutely perfect for folding Advent of Tess pieces, which use either 16 or 24 grid divisions. The series that I was showing you here from 2025 uses all 24 division grids. And if you need to know how to fold 24 divisions on a hexagon, well, there's Tessellation Foundations to help with that. So there's all kinds of options for how to get started folding origami tessellations. Tessellation Foundations really is the basis. It has all of those grid tutorials that you're going to need to even start any of the other tutorials in other courses. The other thing that I would strongly recommend for beginners is to get a bone folder. I offer these in the full pack at gatheringfolds.com. You can also send me a message and ask to do a custom order with a bone folder. So this is super, super useful for when you have a twist set up and you're smoothing out these new folds. It's also super, super useful for folding the grids so you don't end up with joint pain. Yes, I am young, and yes, I fold enough that I do deal with some joint pain if I'm not careful. But using a bone folder really, really helps. And using skytone paper instead of something heavier like elephant hide also really, really helps. Now, I will say that while skytone is my #1 pick for folding origami tessellations, it's what I fold pretty much all of my pieces in, it is not accessible globally. Now, you can find hexagons and squares of skytone in the EU now. Origami Shop does carry those, but you are going to have a hard time finding it in India or China or Africa or Australia. So when you're looking for a paper, you want something that is kind of medium weight. It's a little stiffer than printer paper, but not as thick as cardstock. So if you look at the grams per square meter, GSM, on a pack of paper, you're looking for something in the like 80 to 100 GSM range. Skytone, at least this skytone, is 89 GSM. And you want something that's crisp. You can hear the noises of the paper. And so that's crisp instead of soft, and you want something that's relatively durable. So what skytone is primarily used for is printing certificates and fancy invitation envelopes. That's the kind of paper that you want to look for folding origami tessellations. You can get away with using kami or wax paper or packaging paper, butcher paper, and there are some really good, like off the grocery store shelf alternatives in certain places. But skytone really is the most durable, crisp, and nicely colored paper that I've come across. So happy folding, everyone, and I hope you start folding many more tessellations in the future. See you later.